All right, so here we are in the greenhouse, and we're going to use the greenhouse as kind of our living example of a cell. Now, I understand that it isn't a cell and that there's going to be a lot of stretches or some imagination that you'll have to use to come with me on this tour of a cell. Alright, so before we begin our journey about cells, there's three things I want to cover really quick. The first is that all living things are made out of these things called cells. Okay, cells are the smallest unit of life. It's the smallest a thing can be, and to be also considered a living thing is just one cell. Third part of this big idea is that cells come from other cells. The nucleus of a cell is a center where it contains genetic information, DNA. And that DNA is responsible for controlling all of the activities of the cell. Now, in a greenhouse, there's not really any one thing that controls the activities except for me. I have an app on my phone that can turn the water on and off. I decide what plants I'm going to use. I decide what plants I'm going to remove. I decide everything that happens within the greenhouse. I control it. So in a way, with the greenhouse analogy, I would be kind of like the nucleus for the greenhouse. Okay, now when we start talking about other components of the cell, we get to these things called endoplasmic reticulum. Now, endoplasmic reticulum is a series of membranes that can either be smooth or it can be rough. Now, there's not a great example for this here in the greenhouse, so we're going to jump back into the classroom and look at some images on a computer to help us understand the smooth versus the rough endoplasmic reticulum. All right, so now that we're back in the classroom, I'm going to talk really briefly about the endoplasmic reticulum, the smooth ER and the rough ER, and what the difference is. If this were a cell, this section would be the nucleus. All of this dark purple is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And the reason why I know it's the rough endoplasmic reticulum is because it has all these little dots on it. These dots here are all ribosomes. Okay, this section out here would be called the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. But the important piece to know is that there are no ribosomes on the smooth ER. Now we'll talk about the functional differences. Ultimately, the function of the rough ER is to build and transport protein. Okay, so build and transport protein. The function of the smooth ER is to ultimately, no ribosomes, its job is to produce lipids. Okay, so I hope that helps to kind of get at that. We will really quickly talk about ribosomes as well. All right, so now we're looking at an image of a ribosome. And a ribosome's job ultimately is to make proteins, or to link together amino acids in a chain to form protein. All right, so the Golgi body is a structure in a cell that's really responsible for taking the raw proteins made by a ribosome and turning them into something useful. Kind of like, I have a bowl, I have a cucumber, I have some lettuce, taking all of these things and turning it into salad. All right, so a Golgi body isn't really exactly like making a salad, but it is an organelle inside of cells that modifies and packages proteins to move them to other parts of the cell so they can be used. But what powers all of this? Like in a greenhouse, what powers everything? How am I able to grow all of these things? How am I able to keep it running? How is a cell able to do all of these different functions? Okay, so in cells, organelles called mitochondria power all of these cellular reactions. In a cell, mitochondria make these chemicals called ATP. ATP is a lot like an energy battery. It can store energy and it can release energy. So in the greenhouse, an example of a way that I can release energy or use energy to power the pump for the fish tanks, or the automatic timers, or the lights, or the cooling system. All of these things use electricity. Electricity is the energy source, but the outlets are what give me access to that energy. Kind of like a mitochondria gives the cell access to energy by creating ATP. So yes, ATP is essential for all cellular reactions. And our cells in animals, we create that using mitochondria. Plant cells also have mitochondria, but they've got another trick up their sleeve because they have an additional structure called a chloroplast. Now, a chloroplast is a structure inside of cells that allows the cell to capture energy from the sun and turn it into chemical energy. So if we take a look at, this plant, and we just zoom in. All right, so inside every plant cell are chloroplasts, and their job is to do photosynthesis and convert light energy into usable energy by the plant. So let's look a little bit deeper. All right, so now that we're looking deeper inside of a chloroplast, we have this diagram of essentially what's happening during photosynthesis. The things that go in are light, water, and carbon dioxide. Water and light go to this area of a chloroplast. This is called the thylakoid. That's just where the green pigment chlorophyll is kept and where a process that results in the production of some ATP occurs. Another byproduct of taking water and light energy is oxygen. So really the only thing that the plants need from the water for this piece is the hydrogen. So the hydrogens are absorbed and that causes us to be able to build some ATP, that energy molecule. The other thing is that this ATP then goes to another reaction that happens in the chloroplast where we also bring in carbon dioxide, this ATP and other energy molecules, and the result is sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids. All right, so now the next thing that I want to talk about is what protects the cell. What kind of keeps all of the good stuff in and all of the bad stuff out. For that example, we have to take a trip outside. All right, so now we're here outside the greenhouse and we're looking at the glass. The glass is a lot like the plasma membrane for a cell. The glass of a greenhouse allows sunlight to come in, but prevents heat energy from leaving. That's how the greenhouse can stay warm in the wintertime. Now, a plasma membrane works a lot the same way. It selectively allows some things into the cell, but doesn't allow everything out of the cell. That way the cell can have all of the nutrients that it needs from the outside environment, but it doesn't lose important things that it needs to continue to function. All right, while we're outside, another thing you'll probably notice about the greenhouse is that it's reinforced by all of these metal bars, and even on the bottom there's a brick wall. That would be a lot like the cell wall. Now, our cells, being animal cells, we don't have a cell wall, but plants and bacteria do have cell walls. It's an extra layer of protection and structure. Plants use that structure because they don't have bones, and bacteria use that structure to protect them from the elements. And so a cell wall is an additional layer on the outside of a plant cell or a bacterial cell. In this case, it's kind of like the rigid structure of the metal frames of the glass or even the brickwork along the base of the greenhouse. So additionally, all cells have a vacuole, with the exception of bacteria. In animal cells, it serves as sort of a storage center. In plant cells, it helps to be a storage area as well as to provide additional structure by building up water pressure. But for that example, it would be like this closet. This closet contains all of the extra stuff that I don't use all the time in the greenhouse. So that's extra pipe fittings, it's seeds, it's fertilizer, it's tools, it's all of the things that I need, but that I don't need right now. All right, so the very last structure for us today is the lysosome. A lysosome is an organelle inside of animal cells that breaks things down, kind of like a digestive system of a cell. I'm gonna use a compost pile to illustrate that point, where I take plants, from other things, toss them into the compost pile, and what comes out over time is soil. It breaks it down into things that I can use again. A lysosome works the very same way, where it takes big things that the cell doesn't need anymore or can't use, breaks it down into very components that make it, and then reuse those components to build new things, be that proteins or sugars or powering other reactions within a cell. There you go. All right, so that's it for inside the greenhouse. We're gonna jump back into the classroom just to tie up some loose ends where we talk about bacterial cells, which are called prokaryotes, compare them to plants and animals, which are eukaryotes, and I'll throw in a couple specialized cells because cells have different jobs based on where they are found. All right, so welcome back to the classroom. We're gonna tie up this video as we talk about the difference between plant and animal cells, but as well as specialized cells and bacteria. So if we're looking at these images now, we have mystery cells. You might recognize these from the mystery cell activity we did in class. So mystery cell model C has a cell wall, it has chloroplasts, and it has a really big vacuole. Based on what we talked about, that would be easy to identify this as a plant cell. Mystery cell model B, on the other hand, doesn't have that. It has these things called macrovilli. Okay, macrovilli are these little structures that help to increase the surface area. It has proteins that pull nutrients into the cell. And so based on that information, I'm going to assume that mystery cell B is a digestive cell, so found in our digestive system. So all of these macrovilli allow more nutrients to be absorbed into the cell. The last cell type that we're going to talk about is bacterial cells, or prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are really simple. They're really small. They don't have the same structures or parts as eukaryotic cells. Animals are eukaryotes, bacteriotic cells. Plants have eukaryotic cells. Plants and animals are eukaryotes. Bacteria are prokaryotes. So if we jump in and look at this image of a prokaryote, a bacterial cell, what you'll find is that they don't have a nucleus. They have a nucleoid, which is just where all of their DNA is held. They do have cytoplasm. They do have ribosomes floating around. They have a cell wall, kind of like a plant does. They have a plasma membrane, just like eukaryotes. But they also have an additional structure on the outside called a capsule. Also, things that some prokaryotes and eukaryotes share is a flagellum, that tail that allows them to move. They have things called pili or pilus, which are stringy protuberances that allow them to attach to things and to stick where they're going. But as you can see, if we were to look at this cell, a prokaryote, and if we were to come and look at these cells, eukaryotes, we can see that they're very different, okay, both in structure, but also in terms of what they have inside. So that is just a really quick overview and rundown of cells, the components inside of a cell, comparing plants, animals, and bacteria, and also looking at some specialized cells. Hope that helps, and good luck on the test.